Hello, welcome to this webinar for the Platform on Sustainable Finance and our consultation on environmental criteria for the EU Taxonomy. My name is Nathan Fabian and I'm the chair of the platform. I'm also the Chief Responsible Investment Officer at the UN-supported Principles for Responsible Investment. Today you'll learn about how to contribute to the work of the platform. We have a consultation open until Friday the 24th of September, and the consultation will be on the draft technical screening criteria for around 100 further economic activities that substantially contribute to Europe's environmental objectives. You can find details of the consultation by searching the terms EU Platform on Sustainable Finance, which takes you to our platform webpage, and then scrolling down to the platform publication and news section. We'll show you a link at the end of this webinar presentation. It's a great pleasure to introduce the rapporteurs of the technical working group of the platform who are leading this work on the criteria. First, we have Professor Marzia Traverso. Marzia is head of the Institute of Sustainability and Civil Engineering at RWTH Aachen University. And she's joined by Dr. Ben Allen, Research Director at the Institute for European Environmental Policy. Together, they are our rapporteurs. They've done an enormous amount of work to prepare for this consultation and your participation in the platform's work. It's a great pleasure to welcome them, and they're going to take us through a presentation before we ask them some questions about the consultation. Marzia and Ben, over to you.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you and welcome, everyone. I will share my screen. Give me a second. And I will present you we will present you a short presentation on the work that we have been done until now. So let's see if the now is in view. You can see the presentation correctly? I think yes. Okay, so our work, where are we? We are, as you know, the European Platform Sustainable Finance started working last October 2020, and our work was focusing mainly on the 4 other environmental objectives, so continuing the work done by the TAG before on climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. We focus more on what is the transition to a circular economy, pollution prevention and control, sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, and protection and restoration of biodiversity and the ecosystem. So that was our main focus. So we are the technical working group. A group of people starting from a relatively small group of people, of experts of this and already official members of the platform that focus their attention on environmental on economic activity that were prioritized for these main four objectives. Of course, we will somehow complete the work of the TAG also in few economic activity that were still focusing on climate change mitigation and adaptation, but the most were on the other 4. That gives you a bit an idea, an overview of what was our work. So we start with around 55 economic activities that were prioritized according to the to another study done directly from the European Commission. So our mandate was actually to develop the technical screening criteria for substantial contribution and do not significant harm around these activities. This gives you the idea of the sector where we worked. So we have agriculture, forestry, fishing, mining, processing sector, manufacturing, different focus, so from chemical, rubber and plastics, pharmaceutical to metal, electronics, machinery, but as well textile, wood, beverage. And then we have the energy sector, of course, and then construction and buildings, ICT, emerging services, transport, restoration, remediation and tourism, and then all water resources, so water supply, sewage and waste management. So that's where they grouped how they our work was grouped, and how actually the people, the members, part of the technical working group, were split to focus, according to their expertise, to focus on few activities. The next two slides will give you an overview of what we achieved. So that's exactly, I mean, it's a long list, as you see. The graphic clearly show you that we have, from the left side, you can see the economic activity, so grouped in different sectors, as I said, how we worked actually. Each of the economic activity has been prioritized for few environmental objectives. Just as an example to understand is the forestry and logging were actually prioritized mainly for biodiversity. Instead, you have, as you say, mining that actually was for more objective. Okay, then that gives you I mean, that's also the rest. I mean, the rest of the sector. So from energy, construction, transport, restoration, and then water supply. As I said, the most of them are not prioritized for all of the environmental objectives. You can see also from this that for few of them we complete the work done from the tag. We work also, for example, in adaptation related to construction and buildings. Now I'm happy to give the floor to Ben and to give you an overview on the environmental objective, how was structured our work more related to this topic. Ben.
Thanks, Mattia. And we're obviously going through a lot of detail in this very short presentation and webinar. Most of this is in the report that you'll see for the consultation as well. So you'll get the opportunity to look at that in more detail, the big tables we've included. It's all signposted clearly, and we'll give a bit of a structure to that at the end. So taking forward to the taxonomy from where it is now, from the first delegated act with mitigation adaptation, we're adding the other 4 environmental objectives to it. That's required us to look a little bit differently about how they fit within our prioritization framework, how we develop technical screening criteria for them, what types of impact we actually want to have on those objectives. To do this, we've used the DPSIR framework, the driver, pressure, state, impact and response framework, to characterize our objectives and then how we treat them with our criteria. So some of our objectives, such as biodiversity and water, we're aiming to achieve a state change where, for example, ecosystem condition is improved, or water quality is improved. Some of our objectives are more related to the pressures that exist in the environment. So pollution, for example, is a pressure that impacts the state of other objectives, in this case, biodiversity or water. And then some objectives that we have, like the circular economy, are more a societal response. It's more a system change that we're looking to achieve. So you can see our objectives sit in slightly different places, and that means our criteria drafting for these objectives is slightly different. And as Martia mentioned before, we've taken the scope of our initial work and we've changed it slightly over time, so our activities become more or less granular. Sometimes that's included prioritizing against a different objective. So for example, some of our activities that we looked at were prioritized because they had an impact on the water and marine environment. But actually, when we developed technical screening criteria for them, when we got into the detail of that work, we realized that it was actually the pollution that was causing that impact. So we've changed the objective focus of some of those activities to develop criteria on pollution, because that's the mechanism by which we could achieve the goals that we wanted to do. Next slide, please.
Yep.
Even though our objectives sit at different points in the DPSIR framework, they are obviously closely related, particularly related in the way they're described within the taxonomy regulation, and there's a high degree of overlap between them. This is, in a way, this is good for us. So when we're developing technical screening criteria for one environmental objective, we're also contributing to others by incidence of what we're actually requiring in practice. So this diagram on screen, again, this appears in the report with a bit of explanatory text, so you can learn more about how we've conceptualized our environmental objectives. You can see here that, for example, the pollution objective overlaps with our water and marine objective, because the water and marine objective includes the chemical status of water bodies. Pollution through chemicals to water bodies is covered in the pollution objective as well. Similarly, in the biodiversity objective, we've got the biodiversity ecosystems, including terrestrial, freshwater and marine ecosystems, which of course then overlap to some extent with the water marine objective, which is about the ecological status, the physical status and the chemical status of those water bodies. Pollution also has a direct impact on biodiversity, and the circular economy is a mechanism by which we can reduce pressures or change our response to all of these objectives. So they're all highly interlinked. What you don't see on this picture here is how they relate to climate, particularly to climate adaptation, so building resilience into biodiversity and ecosystems, but also mitigation, the impact of following circular economy actions or reducing pollution that has on mitigation. So that's also part of our scope and part of our picture as well. Next. So as I've mentioned, when we look at the different environmental objectives, we're primarily focused on developing the substantial contribution to those objectives. That's set out in the taxonomy regulation, and that's part of our methodology where which we've been following to develop the technical screening criteria. Substantial contribution can be achieved in broadly two ways, and you'll see this when you look at the technical screening criteria in the annexes to the consultation and on which we're looking for your feedback. They can do that through own performance. So that's where the economic activity itself changes in some way, contributes in some way to that objective directly. And that can either be through reducing the pressure on the environment, or it could be improving the state of the environment. So this is the sort of healing the environment approach. And that's with the economic activity itself. Economic activities can also enable other activities in the economy to achieve substantial contribution. And that's the other mechanism by which an activity can itself deliver substantial contribution. So you'll see when you come to our technical screening criteria, there are some which are enabling activities, and that describes how they can enable something else, some other activity within the economy to achieve an environmental substantial contribution. And some of our technical screening criteria are about how that activity itself, through its own performance, can achieve substantial contribution in these different ways. This methodology is set out in more detail again in the report that you'll be able to see.
Maybe, Ben, if I can add, the enabling were discussed, and where, because there are some somehow a bit new in comparison with others. And we have, so we will also, you will see in the report, we call for your feedback, your inputs, in particular for enabling related to the equipment, energy equipment, energy machinery. So that we need your inputs if it's correct, what you think, or if there are also further data that you can, or scientific evidence that you can deliver to us. So you will see also in the report.
So in terms of the structure of the report, we've got basically two parts to our report. We've got the first part of the report, the front end of the report, which is our methodology, the background to the taxonomy, how the taxonomy works, how we prioritize different environmental objectives, which ones we're focusing on, which one we have focused on in terms of getting to this point in the consultation process, what we are actually presenting, the fact that these criteria are working documents of the platform. They're not a final state. So this is our opportunity then to get feedback from you as a much broader set of stakeholders into criteria development, and then we'll take that information and use that to update our criteria. All of that is described at the beginning of the report, and that's what we're calling Part A. In Part B is the bit that will probably be of most interest to everyone. That's where the actual technical screening criteria are. So this is what you'll see on screen now. This Annex B, Part B to our report is the feedback materials. It has in it the questions that we're asking. These are also available through the web form, so as you'll be able to input into the consultation process. They're in the document as well. And in there is, I believe, nearly 1,000 pages of technical screening criteria covering all of these different economic activities. And you see an indication of how many activities are covered here for the different sectors as well in that report. But you'll be able to select those through drop-down menus on the consultation page, so you can jump straight to the ones which are most relevant to you, your organization, and the environmental objectives to which they're prioritized as well.
This slide give you just an idea, an example of how can be a technical screening criteria. Of course, it's really a summary. In particular for circular economy was, was one of the most discussed, maybe not most discussed, but was one of the environmental objectives together with biodiversity, where we need to make a lot of efforts, because of course circular economy, as already Ben described, is not. It's mainly related to the response, all the activity that can respond to pressure or to impact to improve the current environmental impact, and it's a vision. So somehow needs we need also to define which were the sector indicator, which could be an example of criteria are reported in this one that is related for to the manufacture of plastic packaging, and it's called C22.2, and where we have in this case 2 blocks of requirements to be aligned with taxonomy. One is quite easier, related to the feedstock, so choice of feedstock, where says, for example, 95% of mechanically recycled, chemical recycled, bio-based, or carbon capture utilization feedstock. So that's a requirement on the feedstock itself. And then there are a longer list, because actually I reported only the three first criteria. They are related to the design, to design the product in a more environmental way. So, for example, applying design for recycling principles to enable sorting and recycling at the end of the life. That actually the recycling and recovery stream is already in place in the specific area where they're operating the specific economic activity. Then that there are recovery and recycling stream as to achieve a capture rate, and so on. So all these are, both of them. Both of the block, I would say, has to be met to guarantee that the manufacture of plastic packaging goods is aligned with the circular economy. We don't go more in details, at least not for the technical screening criteria. That's the last slide. They give you again the link to go to the to see the platform worked, and also the actually the consultation process, and so all the information mainly are reported in this website. That's it from our side. So at least from the internal presentation, I stopped to share.
Thanks, Marcia. Lovely. Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Ben. So let's discuss a few points about your work. Thank you for the presentation and everything you've been doing. And of course, let's congratulate the 100 or so experts who have been contributing to this work in a very short time, around 9 months, to develop these 100 activity criteria. Let me just ask you first, just say how we decided which economic activities to focus on.
Sure. Just before that, I think one of the other things that we've got there in the report is learning lessons from this process. So we're taking this opportunity to reflect also on how what we're doing now is different than what we had to do with mitigation and adaptation, what we've learned about adaptation in this approach as well. So you'll see some reflections in the report as well, and they're our way of sort of sharing that learning and testing that with a wider group of stakeholders. How do we decide on the economic activities to focus on? Well, this was partly done as an input to the platform, to the TWG, by an external consultant to prioritize activities based on their impact and on the environmental objectives that they could most contribute towards. And we received that as input. We took that on board, we adopted it, but as part of our methodological process, we We then, once we've broken the TWG down into its sector teams, we asked them to look specifically at those activities, the environmental objectives to which they were prioritized, and see whether that made sense. Could they make a substantial contribution? Was that realistic in practice? Is it a slightly different objective? Was it important that we change the scope of the activity? Because some of our activities were pretty broad. Agriculture is quite broad. So is there a difference between crop production and animal production in terms of how we approach a different objective? Sometimes that led to an increase in granularity of the scope of the activities, as Marcia has already said. Sometimes we came back out to a slightly higher level because the approach that we were taking was similar across multiple activity types. So this happened in our electricity generation approach. So we had a very similar approach across multiple types of electricity generation. Although you will see around 13 features, I think it is, in the technical screening criteria, they're all based on an aggregate approach initially. So that was part of our process. And it's why some activities have been deprioritized, why we've seen a change in objective. We did that initially, and we also were constantly reviewing that as we got into the detail of our criteria development. So that's happened throughout our entire process.
All right, great, Ben. So there's essentially still a materiality lens or approach. So we start with the activities which we think make the most difference, both in terms of their impact and their potential contribution. And that's how we started with mitigation. And of course, the approaches followed through. So that's really good to know. Do you want to jump in, Marcia?
Yes, I want to also highlight that two parameters, I would say, that play, two factors plays an important role in this deprioritization or prioritization. One was the scientific evidence, so that we can have data and scientific evidence in this, and the second one in this relatively short timeline. So there were two points. That's why some activity were actually postponed, mainly not really deprioritized, but just postponed. So we continue to work on it, and we clearly call for further data in the report.
Okay, fabulous. So one of the interesting questions here, now that we've got 6 environmental objectives, of course, is that all the objectives are a little bit different to each other. They're calling for different things. And so are there some reflections you can share on how they're different from each other? Maybe in describing ambition, or what you have to do to be able to make a substantial contribution to, say, biodiversity versus something like mitigation. Are there some nuances and insights there that you can tease out to help people understand what they're going to be seeing?
Yeah, I can start, and maybe Ben can continue. For sure, one thing is the circular economy, for example, where we have to analyze the action. So first of all, to understand which are how we measure it. So material footprint, for example, is one example of the indicator that could be used. And there we have also to work already at the beginning to fix the deadline. So where we want to arrive. So to define by 2050 what we want to reach to have a sustainable activity that's in general a sustainable world according to circular economy. So there we have to fix also that. In other case, biodiversity, for example, has nothing to do with action. Biodiversity is even not with pressure. That was one of the key points where we were a bit confused, because we can reduce the pressure, so the emissions on water, or sorry, in the ecosystem. Water is the same, similar. That's why I say water. Water and biodiversity. And we measure the state of water, and the ecosystem, to be sure that we can guarantee an environmental condition. So that means that in the criteria, you have to have a measurement of the state. So the impact that has been created, caused by the economic activity, and not the level, just the emissions. So that was quite complicated to understand in the process, and also to adjust the measures and the data, so use the data what were available to define what the substantial contribution is for the economic activity. Ben?
Yeah, no, I think the two things I would add to that is there are subtleties within individual objectives as well, and I think that's quite important to understand. So the biodiversity one is a good example. We've got a whole range of biodiversity and ecosystems in Europe and globally, and in developing our criteria, we had to think, well, what is the end state we want to get to? Is it all the perfect natural biodiversity and ecosystems that we might look at and see in places like the Amazon and so on? I mean, that will be quite hard to achieve for all of our economic activities. So we've broken that down as well into the natural and semi-natural states that we want to achieve. So maintaining condition where we have it, improving the condition of them where we can. There's also ecosystems which we know are already managed. So some of the most important biodiversity in Europe comes from managed ecosystems. So that's about then keeping those ecosystems in a sustainable use state, improving the state of those ecosystems as well. And we also have an approach which is about remediating and dealing with the impact of other activities on the environment in the case of biodiversity. So this might be where we deal with a legacy impact by addressing it through activities or measures within the criteria. So an example of that might be if a highway has been constructed and it's gone through a particular habitat, we would want to see funding or the opportunity for funding through the taxonomy going to activities that can address the impact that that's had. That might be building a wildlife corridor across that motorway. It might be putting in sound deadening or something like that through the planting of trees and so on. So there's multiple different ways within a given within a given environmental objective, which we're looking to deliver that impact as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So to everyone watching, this is one of the key things to look out for. Don't assume just because you're reducing impact that you're also substantially contributing. It's going to be different with especially biodiversity, water. Marzia said how circular economy is different. So this is not just replicating the mitigation model. Okay, so there's a bit of thinking for everyone to do here. Please be attentive to that. Okay, so let's just note where we are in our process, because Ben, I think you said almost 1,000 pages of criteria. Now, this is going to be very daunting, and we should probably say we don't expect financial market people who are looking at this consultation to be able to answer all and comment on all the scientific evidence. That's probably not your role. You can still focus on usability questions, but industries and environmental experts and other consultants and think tanks and groups that are working in these areas are more likely to have the detailed feedback, and so we welcome you to focus on it. The stage we're at here is that these are draft criteria, and the consultation helps us get more data and more evidence to refine our criteria. So people are going to see some fairly long criteria descriptions, but we will refine those over time, make them more concise. And if people are wondering, and you haven't yet seen the taxonomy compass, so you can just browse and search for the EU taxonomy compass, and in that online tool is the criteria that resulted from climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And you can see how these things get refined and presented in actually quite a concise way at the end of the process. So we're about halfway, 2/3 of the way through our criteria development. So bear with us. There's a lot of detail in there. Pay attention to what you can, and note that ultimately these become quite refined and concise criteria. Okay, so why don't we just look at some of the specifics of the consultation? What types of questions are we asking? And what type of information are we looking for? So let's give people a hint. What type of answers are you going to pay attention to? Ben, would you like to kick us off on this one?
Yeah, sure. I think as Nathan said, we're at the point here where we're now testing what we've developed with a much larger stakeholder group. So we've been working with just over 100 people to develop all of these criteria, and we've now reached the kind of buffers of where we are with the evidence that we know of, the thresholds we know of, the science that we know of and have been able to research. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for additional evidence to improve our criteria, make them more robust. If there are glaring errors in there in relation to thresholds, performance levels, we'd like to know about them. But principally, we want to know the evidence that underpins that assessment, because that will help us make these criteria more specific, simpler, easier to articulate as well, because they are quite long. at this point.
Fantastic. Marcia, anything to add on that one?
I think not really. I mean, for sure, we need, I mean, that's general, but we need some attention for, we will signalize also in the report where we need your particular attention. So that would be general. We didn't want to make a specific question in the questionnaire, so that is more general. But then in the report, actually, you find a specific point where we call your attention. So,
okay, so what's an example of one or two of the things that you want people to pay attention to?
Enabling, for example, enabling activity related to manufacturing of energy equipment, that you find a specific.
Okay, that's great. All right, so those points where we're particularly saying we really need some help here, those are identified in the report. But the question format is standard, and I think it's drop-down menus. Select the activity, describe what you're providing feedback on, whether it's the activity boundary or the environmental objective or the ambition of the criteria. Fabulous, and it's evidence and analysis that we want. This is not an opinion-seeking effort. This is an effort to improve the analysis and evidence that underpins the criteria and our judgments on those. So thank you, that's very clear.
Maybe one thing more, Nathan, there are a couple of examples where you find more option. So more option in the technical screening criteria. So has not been solved yet. So which one is the best option to require? That's why we ask you also in this case to give us evidence, rationale, we explain the rationale of the three options. That's, for example, for electricity. We give 3 different level threshold, and we define which are the rationale from our side, behind all the 3 thresholds. But we ask you to further confirm what is according to your knowledge and your expertise, which is the most, the better one, I would say, the best one.
Very good. All right, that's clear. And what are you going to do with the data and responses you get?
So we'll take that feedback, as Marcia has said. We're expecting quite a lot. Internally, we had more than we were expecting. So we'll be working through that. We'll be using that to adjust our criteria where that's appropriate, where necessary, making them more robust, as we said, improving our rationale. We will be submitting our, so we take that, we're working at a technical level. That will go into our final report that we will be submitting to the European Commission. That report will have in it some of the methodological elements which you'll see in the consultation report. It will also have some recommendations from us as the technical working group and the platform on what the Commission can do then to take our criteria and integrate them into a delegated act. So we're recommending, we don't decide on what the content of the act is at this point. So we make those recommendations through our report. We intend to do that in November. That's our timeline. And that will give the Commission sufficient time, we hope, we believe, for them to develop the delegated act text, which would come or be adopted in 2022. So after that point, it goes to the Commission, our report goes to the Commission, our recommendations, and that's how your feedback through the stakeholder consultation process will feed in through our criteria, our report, and make its way to the Commission.
That's great, Ben, thank you. Now, we might get a lot of feedback and people asking about new activities that should be part of the taxonomy. And we can say that we are developing a process and a way to receive feedback from stakeholders at any time, like a queuing system for criteria. So this is under development at the moment, and we hope to provide further details on that soon. But if we get feedback on additional activities through this consultation, we will try and note it. And we've had a conversation about when we might start the next batch of criteria. That's not certain yet, but we do plan to start later this year to reviewing the next round of activities. At the time of posting this webinar, the Commission has not set out a regulatory timetable for future delegated acts or future activities beyond the mid-2022 and the current activities we're consulting on. But you should know that there is a process underway, and we will be continuing our work on economic activities, and stakeholders in the market will get to propose activities for the future. All right, so why don't we draw this to a close? Just to restate, you can find the details. If you're seeing this video not on the platform website, if you browse for the EU platform on sustainable finance and scroll down on the page, you will see the link for the consultation, and that will take you through to a separate site where you can register. Now, just to point out, you do need to register for the consultation, so please do that early so that you can see all the questions and pass them to colleagues if you need to. Please do that early, and remember that the consultation closes on the 24th of September. 1 minute each. Final comment, any hope or wish or parting message for our audience?
Maybe yes, one thing that we are happy to get as much as possible your feedback. Be aware that that's just our first work. So nothing, the economic activity are not included in this first part. Will be included. We don't know when, but that's a continuous work. So the platform is a stable organism, at least it should be. So we will call for further feedback also in terms of activity. So stay with us, follow our work also in the future.
Thank you, Marzia. And Ben?
Yeah, I would echo all of that from Marzia. I think also there are other opportunities to feed into the platform process. This is our main approach to gathering this specific stakeholder feedback, but the platform itself is comprised of 50 odd permanent members. They represent academics, they represent industry organizations, civil society organizations, financial institutions. They're also a conduit to feed into this process as well. So this won't be the only, it's the only opportunity to comment on the criteria, but it's not the only opportunity to feed into our process. So there's multiple ways you can reach us in this process.
Very good. And my closing note is to say thank you to you and all the platform members. You have come up with these 100 criteria in 9 months. The previous TEG did the same amount of work and it took 2 years. We know you've benefited from the methodology, but there's no doubt that this group has been working exceptionally hard and breaking new ground on these new environmental criteria. Thank you to you. Thank you to everyone who contributes through this consultation, and we look forward very much to reporting back to you what you've shared with us in your feedback. Thank you all. Bye-bye.